So we're going to talk about the deep state. Who here has heard about the deep state before? Raise your hand if you've heard about the deep state. Okay, almost everybody. That's good. It's becoming a kind of a common knowledge, right, that there is this deep state. But what is the deep state? That's the question. So we're going to define the deep state. We're going to see what other people have said about it. Where did this term come from? How come we're talking about it now? We'll look at different levels of the deep state. Some people who talk about deep state, they're just talking about the bureaucrats, right? We have lots of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. I'm sure there's lots of bureaucrats in your state capital and your local government. And so that's what some people mean when they talk about the deep state. We also have the intelligence agencies, right? During the Trump administration, this has really come out in the open that we have all these intelligence agencies that are just running wild and doing whatever they feel like it, leaking information that they're not supposed to be leaking. So a lot of people have come to realize, whoa, something's going on here. And just today, an FBI report was unveiled. We don't have it publicly, but it was just mentioned in the news today, identifying some of these bureaucrats in the deep state. We'll look at the deep state money apparatus. Where do they get all their money to do this? And then we'll look at, what I think is the most important and relevant is the deep state behind the deep state. Just a quick show of hands. How many of you guys were here at my last talk, I think a year and a half ago, War on America? Okay, some of you were. So I'll consider this almost like part two, because in the first one, in the War on America, I showed what they were doing, how they were doing it, what the agenda was, where the lies were that underpinned their agenda. And so in this one, I'm going to tell you who they is, right? You always hear that question, who is they? Well, today we're going to find out. I don't claim perfect knowledge. We're talking about a lot of things that are very secretive. Nobody probably, other than the people involved, really has a full picture. But what I will do, I'm not going to theorize, right? I'm not here to theorize. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you facts, and there's obviously going to be some blank spots in those facts because that's just the nature of what we're talking about. It's called a deep state for a reason because it's hidden deep somewhere where we can't observe it, right? So we're going to do our best to look at what it is. We're going to look at the deep state's agenda just very briefly. I mean, War on America, that really was the deep state agenda, right? Bamboozle us all into a global totalitarian system when you just boil it all down. So we'll talk a little bit about that. The deep state and Trump, believe it or not, there are some swamp creatures in his administration. He promised to drain the swamp, but there are still some swamp creatures there. So we'll look at them. And then we'll look at, finally, last but not least, defanging the deep state. So the term deep state, this used to be associated with third world countries, dictatorships, where you had kind of the power behind the scenes, right? Yeah, there might have been a dictator out front or a puppet out front, but really there was a power behind the scenes that called the shots. So in Egypt, we just really recently witnessed this when Mohammed Morsi, the Islamist candidate, the Muslim Brotherhood, got elected. Actually, he was elected by the people, and then he was removed. And we can have our own opinion about whether he should have been removed or not, but the fact is there was powerful elements in the military and the security agencies that were not happy with him, and they removed him. So this is kind of where the origin of the term deep state comes from different countries like Egypt, like Pakistan, like Turkey, where you have this kind of state behind the state. The true deep state, the one that I'm talking about, the deep state behind the deep state, wants to gather together all of these different deep states all over the world. Right? Every country has its own deep state, its own hidden powers that like to try to call the shots, the money people, the military people, and so on. And so the deep state behind the deep state wants to gather all these little deep states together and put them together into one global system. And unfortunately, they've made a lot of progress, as we're going to see tonight, but they haven't succeeded yet. So this is now mainstream news, right? I mean, you can turn on any of the fake news channels, right? Donald Trump recently upgraded CNN to very fake news. I think that was appropriate. But we can hear about the deep state on the television, right? It's kind of an open secret now. They really had to expose themselves. So ABC says it's a term used to refer to the idea that there's a cadre of government workers, right, who are hiding together somewhere in the government trying to influence policy. The deep state, the real deep state, the deep state behind the deep state is truly international, and we're going to look at some of the evidence showing that to be the case. But primarily we're going to focus on the deep state in the United States. And who are the figures here? What are they up to? Really interesting. The polls now show, and this is, I think, a very bad way to phrase the poll, but we'll do what we can with it. But ABC News and Washington Post came out with a poll, and they said that almost half of Americans now believe in the deep state. About 1/3 think it's a conspiracy theory, and I guess when the pollsters asked that, it was assumed that a conspiracy theory by definition is false. Obviously, a conspiracy theory can be true or false, but and then you had, I think, 1 in 6 who say they don't know. Among Republicans, it's slightly more prevalent, independents, but almost half of the American people now realize there is a deep state. So we're making progress, right? It's taken us a long time to get to this point where people even realize that, you know, despite what we were taught, despite what we were told, there's things going on that we're not aware of. So here's Politico. They say the deep state is real, but it might not be what you think it is. And here's Ed Snowden. You know, you can think whatever you want about him. It's interesting that he's hiding out in Russia, but he did say that there's definitely a deep state. Trust me, I've been there. And he probably has, right? He used to work at the NSA. For those of you who don't remember, he leaked a whole bunch of documents that, I mean, a lot of the stuff was already known, right? 10 years ago, I would tell people, hey, they have all your emails, they have all your phone calls. Oh, you're such a conspiracy theorist. That's ridiculous. And now it's a commonly accepted fact. We all know that they're monitoring our emails and our phone calls and storing it all. But he was one of the guys who helped break that story. Here we have Dennis Kucinich. He's a Democrat, right? Actually a pretty far left Democrat. And he says there's a deep state trying to take down President Trump. Wow. So a Democrat is admitting this, right? He says the deep state also was at work in the Obama administration, and they hijacked his Syria policy. He wanted to have some kind of deal with Russia, apparently, where they were going to do something together in Syria, and the deep state apparently nixed it. That's what Dennis Kucinich said. And this, I just found out today, actually, before I came over here. There was a report in Breitbart. There's a new book coming out, what's it called? All Out War by Edward Klein, who's apparently on the left wing of the spectrum. And so the FBI did this report, apparently 1,400 words. They interviewed 2,000 government employees, I think it said in the news article. They said they have actionable intelligence that there is a growing movement to block or interfere with administration policy decisions. So, you know, most of us figured this out on our own, but, you know, the FBI has now confirmed it. They have regular organized meetings where they're discussing with government workers. And here's something interesting. There are non-government individuals associated with these meetings. So let's talk about some of this. The term deep state applied to the United States is a relatively new phenomenon, right? Until very recently, we had this kind of collective national mythology that we make all the decisions and our government is transparent and we have a constitutional republic and that's how it's always going to be. You know, recently we've started realizing as a people, as American people, that that's not always true. But Mike Lofgren, he was a congressional staffer. He was there for 30 years, had a top secret security clearance. He hates the Tea Party. I mean, I think he called them Taliban or something. Ostensibly, he was a Republican, but a liberal Republican. And he came out in 2014 and wrote a big essay about the deep state. And then he came out with a book in 2016, before Trump became president, about the deep state. So it's interesting to hear his insight. I think he's missing part of the picture, but he certainly has some insight from his time in Congress with a top secret security clearance. And he says that it's a hybrid association of elements with government, top-level finance, industry. So, you know, we were told 5-10 years ago that was a ludicrous conspiracy theory. You know, oh, they would never get together in a back room and make some kind of deal that we don't know about, right? We live in America. That only happens in other countries. Well, it turns out it does happen in America, too. Here's Mike Lofgren. Probably has some Swedish ancestors somewhere with a last name like that. And there's his book, 2016 book, The Deep State, The Fall of the Constitution and the Rise of a Shadow Government. So actually this is not a new phenomenon, but it's new, I think, that people are starting to come across this. We had a high-ranking official in the Trump administration who highlighted the deep state. This memo is worth your while to read. I mean, you can go on the internet and you can check it out. And I forgot to say at the beginning, you know, as you guys sit there, if you have your phone and you have your internet, if you look at a quote on here or something and say, they didn't really say that, I encourage you, flip it to Google, type it in, and check it for yourself, because I've only used quotes that are 100% verifiable, and so I want you guys all to have confidence that this is accurate, and if you want, you know, take notes, go home and check it. So this memo is interesting, by Richard Higgins. I have a friend who knows him. He was fired by some deep state operatives, but he wrote this memo where he said that the Trump administration was under sustained, relentless attack. He compared it to a Maoist insurgency. And he talked about globalists and Islamists and the media and the big business and the Antifa types all working to destroy President Trump. So that was interesting. Globalists and Islamists recognized that for their visions to succeed, America must be crushed as an ideal and as a national and a political identity. So that's pretty serious stuff. This guy was a director of policy and planning at the National Security Council. There's a picture of him. And he was ousted. not very long ago by H.R. McMaster. We'll talk about him a little bit more. I don't know if you guys know him. He's Trump's national security advisor, very, very powerful person, and he's deeply intertwined with the deep state behind the deep state, and we'll get through there. So first let's talk about the bureaucratic deep state, because there really is one, right? I didn't mean to minimize it earlier when I was kind of making fun of the idea, but there really is a bureaucratic deep state. These are bureaucrats who cannot be fired. I mean, they could even be committing crimes and you can't fire them. And they have their own agenda, right? There's almost 3 million civilian federal employees working for the federal government. That's according to the Office of Personnel Management, and that doesn't include the more than 2 million who are in the military and the more than 20 million who work for the state and local government. And this bureaucratic deep state loves Hillary Clinton, right? You probably could have figured that out on your own, but we have the data to show that. So there's something like 430 agencies, and if you look, this is a chart. I took this from thehill.com, which occasionally is a reliable publication. And you can see there where the bureaucrats were giving their money. Department of Agriculture, 99.4% of the political donations went to Hillary Clinton. Department of Education, you probably won't be surprised to know that 99.7% of the donations went to Hillary Clinton. So in most of these bureaucracies, it's like 98, 99%. There's a couple, I think the lowest one was at the military, like 89, but you can see the numbers there. I mean, Trump basically got nothing from these federal bureaucratic deep state operatives. And it's not to say that they're all bad. You know, I've seen a lot of people explain that away, that, well, they're worried that Trump might get rid of their jobs, they're worried that Trump is going to take away their power, you know, reassign them, whatever. And maybe that's true. But the fact is, the bureaucracy that Trump is ostensibly in charge of totally opposes Trump. And you know, the FBI memo confirms that. It's becoming very obvious that this massive machine that he sits on top of opposes everything that he campaigned for. So everybody has kind of picked up on this, right? Joe Biden says these bureaucrats call him all the time, and he tells them, please stay there. There has to be a return to normalcy at some point, right? Clinton said the same thing. Stick it out, stick it out. The tide has got to turn. So they're telling these deep state federal bureaucrats, figure out a way to stay in there so that when we eventually, you know, when the deep state takes charge of everything again, you'll be okay. And whether Trump is part of the deep state or not, I'll leave that to you guys to decide. I'm not going to tell you anything about that, but I will show you some of the people in his administration. So 78 high-level Obama political appointees have burrowed into the civil service, so you know, more deep state operatives, and now they can't be removed because they're part of the civil service. And just some interesting facts. I came across this. I was writing about an article the other day about a bill that was introduced in Congress. There's almost 500,000 federal regulations with criminal penalties attached. How many of you think you've ever violated one? Right? Everybody in this room, I can guarantee you, has violated one. If you ever wrote a check for less than $1, if you ever had your dog on a leash that was more than 6 feet long on federal property. I mean, there's so many of these. There's nobody in the world who knows how many of these there are or what they say. Lawmakers asked the Congressional Research Service, hey, figure out how many regulations there are with criminal penalties. They say, whoa, we can't do that. We lack the resources. Right? It's incredible that we have this kind of situation. And most of these, you don't even need to have a guilty mind to be convicted. So you don't have to have willfully violated this criminal regulation. You just accidentally did it, and you could be prosecuted. Now, are we all going to be prosecuted for violating some obscure federal regulation that we didn't know of? Probably not, right? They don't have the manpower to prosecute us all either. But if you make somebody really mad, things might change, right? And they'll have all the evidence. You know, the NSA has been collecting it for years. So if you make somebody really mad, you could very easily find yourself on the other side of those bars. Dinesh D'Souza recently figured this out the hard way. He wrote a book exposing Hillary and Obama and some of these guys, and then he was prosecuted for some obscure, you know, election law violation. And he actually, I think he went to prison for a while, just to jail. And so, you know, that could be any of us, right? There's an interesting book out there. I think I had it on the last slide. The guy argues, an attorney, Harry Silvergate, that the average American commits on average 3 federal felonies per day. If you're a professional, you know, you're going to and from work, you're committing 3 felonies per day without knowing it. So, you know, you make somebody in Washington mad enough, and they'll come looking through your stuff, and they'll say, aha, you violated this one, that one, this one, that one, and then you'll go behind bars. So the Constitution, of course, doesn't permit any of this, right? The Constitution delegated all legislative powers to Congress. That means none for the bureaucracy, none for the Supreme Court. But we do have now this deep state bureaucracy. Here's another law professor from some university in Louisiana. There is no one in the United States over the age of 18 who cannot be indicted for some federal crime. That's everybody in this room. Make somebody mad enough, and you may find yourself on the wrong end of a prosecution. So here, that brings us to this guy, Mr. Mueller. He's running a fishing expedition against the president, right? They got their tinfoil hat on. They said there's a conspiracy and Trump is a KGB agent. They haven't provided any evidence yet, but he's going to find it somehow. But actually, they indicted a couple of guys just today. And you can be sure, again, everybody in this room could be indicted on some federal crime. If you put a special prosecutor, you give him millions of dollars, you give him an army of attorneys, they will find something that you've done that could put you behind bars. This deep state also, I think, played a very key role in taking down Michael Flynn, actually Trump's first national security advisor. I don't know how many of you guys remember that, but he wasn't perfect, but he was a real good guy. He was honest. He wasn't part of the deep state, behind the deep state, not a member of the CFR or the Bilderbergers or any of those that we'll talk about. And so I think that's probably why they took him out. They couldn't have that kind of person in such a sensitive position. So let's talk about the intelligence bureaucracies real quick. I love this cartoon. Good boy. And then, right, there's our intelligence agencies now. So we really, the deep state almost exposed itself in trying to take down Trump. We had an average of 1 leak per day of, sensitive national security secrets, classified information. This is just incredible. There's never been anything like this in our history, where you've had all these different operatives within all these bureaucracies leaking information to try to take down the president, to try to sabotage his policies. We found out that Obama had been using foreign intelligence agencies to spy on Trump's people to figure out what they could get him on, and presumably that's how they got Michael Flynn. And then they were unmasking a lot of these people, right? And so this stuff, I think, is incredible. Here's a guy who used to work for the NSA. He was some kind of analyst at the NSA. This is his actual Twitter. He says, now we go nuclear, right? Because Trump was mad at the intelligence agencies for leaking all this information. He said, now we go nuclear. I see intelligence community war going to new levels. He just got an email from a senior intelligence community friend, and it began, he will die in jail. Talking about our president. So we elect a president, and then the deep state decides they don't like him, so they're going to wage a nuclear war on him, and they're going to have him die behind bars in jail. Well, what kind of apparatus is this that can threaten our elected president? It's pretty incredible. And it's not even a secret. Here's the Senate Minority Leader. I think you guys probably recognize this guy, right? So he supposedly represents you, right? But anyway, Senator Chuck Schumer, Senate Minority Leader. He says, let me tell you, he said this on MSNBC, let me tell you, you take on the intelligence community and they have 6 ways from Sunday, I don't even know what that means, at getting back at you. So even for a practical, supposedly hard-nosed businessman, he's being really dumb. So it's an open secret in Washington. You cross the intelligence agencies and they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. I mean, is this what the Constitution prescribes? Is this what we signed up for, right? This is just out of control in my opinion. And everybody knows it in Washington. So, these guys could be totally out of control, but you don't want to have them get back at you 6 ways from Sunday, so you just keep your mouth shut. And you just, oh, you guys need $60 billion in a secret budget that's classified that nobody can see? Oh, here you go. Oh, you guys are caught trafficking drugs? Oh, we don't see anything. Don't want 6 ways from Sunday to get back at us, right? So it's incredible. So we'll talk about some of the crimes perpetrated by these intelligence agencies that we know of, right? There's probably gazillions more that we don't know of, and we'll run through them real quick. I encourage you guys to look at this stuff for yourself, because I'm only going to cover a fraction of what we know about the criminality of these agencies. And I'll say, as a caveat, not everybody who works for these bureaucracies is a criminal. There's plenty of really, really good people in there. In fact, I know some of them. There's good people in the NSA. Some of them have actually resigned to blow the whistle on some of this stuff. We'll talk about Binney. But there are, unfortunately, a lot of bad apples, you might call them, and unfortunately, most of them tend to gravitate towards the top of the organizations. So we have 16 known intelligence agencies, right? We have the CIA, the NSA, the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. These are the best known ones, but each branch of the service has its own. The Washington Post, before it was bought by Jeff Bezos, billionaire Bilderberger, who's got huge contracts with the CIA, right? He had a $600 million contract with the CIA. That's like 3 times what he paid for the Washington Post. So, and they never disclose it in their articles, by the way. But they did a great story, great investigation. They said there's 1,250 government organizations dealing with intelligence, 2,000 companies doing contracting in 10,000 locations all across the country. They said there's almost 1 million people with top secret security clearances. Who knew keeping America safe was so costly? Right? Silicon Valley has been enlisted, conscripted is the way Lofgren put it. I'm not sure conscripted is the right word because that implies something involuntary, right? I'm pretty sure a lot of these guys got into bed with them willingly, right? If you look at the Bilderberg members, it's always heads of Google, Facebook, Twitter, you know, all these guys, they love to go congregate with the deep state behind the deep state. Lofgren, the congressional aide, he says the deep state machine uses the intelligence agencies, the national security agencies, and that they start wars wherever they feel like it. They never learn any lessons. They want a war in Iraq, they'll just fix some fake intelligence about weapons of mass destruction. Hey, here's the receipts. We sold them, 20 years ago, literally. Then Afghanistan, Libya, Syria are some of the recent ones. And just, for some insight into this. This blew my mind when I saw it. When I first saw this, I thought this has to be a fake document. It's not. It's a real document. And you can go look it up for yourself. Thank you to Judicial Watch who managed to pry this loose. I don't think they even realized how important what they got was. But, all these bureaucracies are supposedly keeping us safe from terrorism, right? That's why we have 16 intelligence agencies nowadays, to keep us safe from terrorists. Well, here we have a 2012 report from the Defense Intelligence Agency. They say that the West, by which they mean the United States, the French government, the British government, et cetera, the European Union, the Gulf countries, by which they mean mostly the Sunni Arab dictators, the Saudis, the Qataris, et cetera, and then Turkey, support the Syrian opposition. And then right after that, they tell us that the Salafists, Salafism is like a hardcore kind of the Islam that they practice in Saudi Arabia. The Salafists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Al-Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces driving the insurgency in Syria. So on the one hand, they admit they're supporting the insurgency in Syria, and on the other hand, in the same document, they admit that the insurgency in Syria is led by Al-Qaeda. If any of us were to do that, we would go to jail for a very, very long time. And I've looked at the statute. There's no exemptions for government bureaucrats or intelligence agencies. So very interesting. Then a little further down in the same document, they talk about the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want. We know who that is, the US, the Gulf countries, the West, Turkey. And today, this principality exists. It's called the Islamic State. It's called ISIS. They like to behead Christians. They like to crucify children. They like to take women and girls into sex slavery. So here you have it right from the Defense Intelligence Agency admitting that their policy was to create a Salafist principality in eastern Syria. And now we need all these intelligence agencies to keep us safe from ISIS. So isn't that interesting how that works? And it gets a lot worse. So here's their Salafist principality. You can see it's right in eastern Syria, right where their policy wanted it to be. And I talked a little bit about this in War on America, right? How they were doing it. Just incredible stuff. Go look at the document yourself. I don't expect you to believe me. The document is available now publicly. And Trump said this too, so it's not even at this point out of the ordinary, but Trump said that Hillary and Obama are the co-founders of ISIS. And people kind of laughed like it was funny, but he was right. He was absolutely right. And we have smoking gun evidence that Hillary and Obama and the deep state behind the deep state were the creators, the co-founders of ISIS. And that's shocking to a lot of people, but that's what the documents show. And thank you to Judicial Watch for getting that document out. We also have a lot of fake terrorism, right? There was an interesting study done by the Human Rights Watch. They said almost every single alleged terror plot in the United States after September 11th was orchestrated or helped along or even created from start to finish by the FBI. New York Times found the same thing. So, you hear they do the big headlines, right? Special breaking news alert. We just busted some terrorist. And then later you find out, oh, actually that was, a guy who had mental problems and the FBI offered him $1,000 if he would say something radical. And here, we'll give you all the stuff you need to build a bomb. And why don't you go put the bomb over here? And it's just unbelievable stuff. And this happens all the time. So you get the breaking news alert, terrorists going to bomb your city, but then you don't find out that actually it was the FBI that concocted the entire thing. They're not beyond using false flag attacks either. False flag attacks is where you have an attack and you try to blame somebody else, right? It's from the old Navy days, right? You would fly a false flag on your ship if you wanted somebody else to get blamed. So here we have, again, smoking gun documents. Operation Northwoods is one example among many. The Department of Defense at the highest levels was planning to cause terrorist attacks. They wanted to blow up airplanes. They were talking about sinking boats of refugees. They were talking about planting bombs and blaming it on Castro. And Castro is a bad guy, But we don't need to perpetrate terrorism and then blame it on him to prove that he's a bad guy, right? It's self-evident he's a bad guy. They put him there. They should have known. And we'll get to that in a minute. But here's the smoking gun evidence that they plan to create fake terrorist attacks and actually kill real people. Is one of the plots described in these documents. You can read them yourself, to be blamed on a foreign enemy as an excuse to start a war. Similar with Operation Mongoose. They wanted to put bombs in Miami. I was born in Miami. They wanted to put bombs in Miami and blow people up so they could blame Castro and start a war. And speaking of Cuba and Castro, here's from our U.S. ambassador, and this is a whole nother story. There's a great magazine back there, The New American. It says, it's got that Cuban flag and the fist on it. I encourage you to get that if you want to know the background here. But here's from our ambassador to Cuba at that time. It says, we are responsible for bringing Castro in power. And that was sworn testimony before the Senate. He wrote a whole book about it. We were arming Castro and his communists. The New York Times was calling him a freedom fighter and comparing him to America's founding fathers. Obviously a CFR member. We'll get to the CFR. And the State Department just absolutely loved the guy. That's why the fourth floor, right, where the bosses of the State Department stay. And so he testified. He told the Senate, hey, we put Castro in power. That was a dumb idea, but that's what they did. And once you look at the background, it isn't maybe so surprising anymore. Here's John Brennan. He was our most recent CIA chief before the one that Trump put there. And he was talking in 2016, this was just last year. He said, I voted for the Communist Party candidate. And he told his interviewers when he was trying to get a security clearance from the CIA to go work for the CIA that he voted for the Communist Party candidate just 4 years earlier before this interview. He voted in '76. The interview was in 1980. He admitted to voting for a Soviet puppet. The Soviet Union, remember, was murdering people all over the world, starting revolutions, putting people in gulags. They killed tens of millions of people at least. And he told them, I voted for the Communist Party candidate. They said, here you go, have a security clearance. And then he ended up in charge of the CIA. Pretty incredible, right? They're supposed to be protecting us from communists. And instead they're putting communists in charge. Pretty crazy. And this is not a new problem, of course. Even back when the CIA was still the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, it was filled with communists from top to bottom. It wasn't even a secret. They were bragging about hiring communists, and their excuse was, well, Stalin is our ally, and so it'll be helpful to have a bunch of communists filling the intelligence agencies. Here's Eugene Dennis. He was one of the recruiters for the OSS. Got busted in the Venona documents. He was actually recruiting communists into the OSS, which became the CIA. And there's tons of these guys. I mean, there's tons and tons of them. I just picked out a few. Elizabeth Bentley, who was a Soviet spy here in the United States, she said she was collecting dues from all kinds of high-ranking people in the OSS in Washington, D.C. And the FBI knew about a lot of this. They actually went to the head of the OSS and they said, hey, your agency is filled with communists. Here's the dossiers. We know they're communists. Say, oh, no, that's okay. We want them there. The Venona papers, the NSA decrypted a lot of these documents, and we found out that there was at least 200 of these communists operating up and down the federal bureaucracy. A lot of them were in the intelligence agencies. Among them was Duncan Lee. He was the assistant to the OSS founder, William Donovan, who again was proud of his communists. This Duncan Lee was also the head of the China section at the OSS Secret Intelligence Branch. So you wonder how China fell to the communists? Well, there's books on the back. It's a fascinating story. It's an incredible tragedy. The head of the Latin American division was a communist, and we wonder why Latin America keeps electing so-called all these communists. Well, because the deep state behind the deep state wants them there. And this was interesting. I came across this while I was preparing this presentation. Somebody in the Washington Post, a columnist, had written that the OSS was infiltrated by communists. And the head of the OSS Society, the old veterans from the OSS, he wrote back, he wrote a response letter to the editor. They didn't infiltrate. We hired them. They were proud of it. You can read it yourself. It's still on their website. They were proud of their communists. And remember, the whole justification for all these agencies and all this spending was to protect us from the communists. And yet the fox was in the hen house all along. So we'll do a brief review of some of the crimes of these deep state intelligence agencies: torture, mass murder, gun running, drug trafficking, illegal spying, kidnapping, regime change. You wonder who's going to protect us from the protectors. I don't know. Hopefully you guys. But and I just want to clarify something too, because there might be some people thinking, well, they're keeping us safe from terrorists, and it's okay if they drop a bomb on a terrorist because he's a terrorist. Well, they've told us who they think is the terrorists, right? They have 72 categories, and I can guarantee you're on that list. right? I can guarantee you. They have people who love liberty, people who promote states' rights, people who don't want a new world order, people who oppose global government, people who want the borders enforced, people who don't want people murdering babies, pro-lifers, people who support the environment, right? Environmentalists, Jews, Catholics, Christians, returning veterans. And I mean, I could go on and on, right? I mean, you are on that list, I can guarantee it. So when they say, we're keeping you safe from terrorists because we're killing terrorists, they're talking about people like you. Maybe not yet, but eventually we're going to get to that point if we allow this to continue. Here's a slide. I got this from the Department of Defense. This is what they were teaching our troops. Here's their list of religious extremism. Notice Al-Qaeda, notice Hamas, notice, who else do we have on here? The Ku Klux Klan, right? And then who else do you notice on there? Evangelical Christians, Catholics, and Orthodox Jews. Isn't that interesting? We're terrorists and we're religious extremists too, if we are evangelical Christians or Catholics. So this is what they're teaching our troops. That is a slide directly from a presentation that was given to our troops. Here's some of the torture, and I can guarantee you, this is the kind of stuff that's going to end up in the history textbooks. So take a good look. That's what people are going to remember about America in the history textbooks. They're going to say, America was evil, see that thing with liberty, that didn't work out, look what those people did. And this is what they were doing in our name and with our money. It's a crime. Our federal laws prohibit the use of torture. Nobody's been prosecuted. All the people who ordered this to happen are still running around. They're still working at fancy think tanks and making 6-figure salaries, 7-figure salaries. But this is what they were doing to people who they accused of being militants or terrorists, right? And I mean, it's just incredible. So these are the confirmed methods of torture that we know they were using. I mean, it just sounds so uncivilized. I can't even bring myself to look at this stuff. Waterboarding, beating them, putting hoods on them, deafening noises, sleep disruption, sleep deprivation, depriving them of food and water, sexual humiliation, extreme heat and cold, putting them in coffin-like boxes, medically unnecessary rectal rehydration. I mean, just stuff that's so monstrous, you might associate it with, uncivilized barbarians from the medieval times. And this is what our government is doing. Here's the secret prisons that the CIA was operating. They would just kidnap people right off the street in other countries, take them to these secret prisons and torture them. So this is criminal stuff. I mean, our laws prohibit this kind of stuff, and yet the people responsible are still running around. In 2009, an Italian court actually convicted 23 CIA agents. These guys had just kidnapped an Egyptian guy right off of the street, stuffed him into a van, shipped him over to Egypt to be tortured. When he came out, he was disabled. I mean, they had put him through shock torture, electrical shock torture, genital torture. This is what our government is doing. These people were convicted in Italy. They all fled the country, of course. They didn't want to end up in jail. Our government should have been prosecuting these people. Why do the Italians have to prosecute them? We have federal laws against torturing people, and there's no excuse, but it's happening. Mass murder. And I realize murder is a really harsh term. Some of you are thinking, well, it's a war, what are you going to do? Well, when you kill people and you don't have a congressional declaration of war, you don't have a conviction in a court of law, if you go kill those people, that's called murder. You cannot go up to someone and say, well, I thought they were a terrorist or I thought they were a militant and get away with it. And yet our government is doing this all day, every day. The Church Committee, we'll talk a little bit more about them. In 1975, they started investigating these intelligence agencies. They found out that the CIA had been involved in all sorts of assassinations and assassination plots, including against foreign leaders. They had developed this ice gun, right, so that there wouldn't be any evidence. So who knows how many people they actually killed, but it would shoot and you can watch the testimony about this on YouTube. It's available now. They would shoot an ice dart into somebody. The ice dart would melt, and it would put some kind of poison into your bloodstream, so you would get a heart attack, and it just looked like a heart attack. So who knows how many people they killed, but we can be sure it's many. Today they just do it openly, right? Today they talk about it on the news. Hey, today we dropped a bomb on 5 terrorists and accidentally killed their whole family. That's too bad. So here's the rise in the mass murder of people. These are collected from different organizations. Here's 2 of the victims. Actually, both of these were born in the United States. Their father was never even charged with a crime. Actually, they said he was a propagandist for Al-Qaeda. Whether he was or not, I have no idea. They never took him to court. They never filed charges. No jury ever said, hey, you're guilty of being a propagandist for Al-Qaeda. But they killed his kids. They dropped bombs on their heads with these drones, right? These weaponized unmanned drones. So I call that murder. They call it collateral damage, right? There's so much of this going on. Thousands and thousands of people killed. And they brag about their mass murder. So I want to let you guys watch this real quick. This is a guy. He was the head of the CIA. Then he was the head of the NSA. And he's also a Bilderberg attendee. He's also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. For those of you who don't know those names, you'll learn them soon because we'll be talking about them.
Used in the ways that David described.
Yeah, first of all, David's description of what you can do with metadata, and quoting a mutual friend, Stuart Baker, is absolutely correct. Okay, we kill people based on metadata.
You remember when the whole fuss about all the spying was going on? Oh, we're just taking your metadata. We kill people based on metadata. That's the guy who controls the button and drops bombs on people. So pretty creepy stuff, in my opinion. And that's just one example. We could we could talk about that for a long time, but just incredible stuff. There's William Binney. He's one of the whistleblowers. He came out way before Snowden, and he told us everything we needed to know. Hey, they've got 80% of your phone calls stored in some data center somewhere, right? They've got all your emails. He finally resigned. He said, I couldn't do this anymore. We're violating every American's constitutional liberties. I'm not going to do it anymore. There's one of the places where they're storing your data. It's in Utah. That facility can hold a yottabyte, I never heard that term before, of information, the equivalent of about 500 quintillion pages of text. So you can imagine how many of your emails they can store in there, right? And we had warnings about this. Senator Frank Church warned back in 1975, if the NSA were ever to turn these capabilities on the American people, they would know everything. If we were ever to end up with a dictator, there would be no way to fight back because they would know everything. Now, multiply that by 1 million, and that's where we are today. They know everything. They can listen to your phone when it's off. They can turn on the camera on your laptop. And we know this all for a fact because whistleblowers have come out and told us about it. They can know anything they want to. Even Congress gets spied on by these people, believe it or not. So, Senator Chuck Schumer, he wasn't lying when he said they have 6 ways from Sunday to get back at you. This is Dianne Feinstein, who, she's normally an apologist for the deep state. She loves the gun bans and the big government and the spying. And she found out that the CIA had been spying on her committee. Her committee had been investigating this torture that we looked at. The CIA was spying on their computers, deleting files out of their computers, reading their emails. So even Congress is not safe. If you think you're safe when Congress is not safe, you've got another thing coming. And she says, it might have violated the separation of powers. It might have violated, are you kidding me? So they also do gun running, right? Do you guys remember Operation Fast and Furious? Obama and his buddies got caught sending weapons to Mexican drug cartels, and then when they got caught, they're like, we were investigating somebody. Then we found out the guy they were investigating was already on the FBI payroll. And then we looked back in time and said, all those times when they said, look at the violence in Mexico, it's because of the Second Amendment. No, it wasn't. It was because you were sending them weapons. What did you think was going to happen? Then we found out they were sending weapons in Syria to the terrorists in Syria and in Libya, actual Al-Qaeda people. People who were carrying Al-Qaeda flags saying, hey, I'm Al-Qaeda, who will listen to me? I'm Al-Qaeda. They were sending heavy American weapons to them. They got caught drug running 1 million times. I could have shown you a video of the head of the DEA at the time, Robert Bonner. He went on CBS, national television. He said, yep, I caught the CIA bringing 1 metric ton of cocaine into this country in collaboration with the Venezuelan government. What happened? Absolutely nothing, right? They just continue. In 2014, there was an investigation by one of the leading Mexican newspapers. They said the U.S. government had a secret deal with the Sinaloa cartel, one of the most violent and brutal drug cartels, where they could bring in as much drugs as they wanted to. They could do anything they wanted, launder money, ship weapons back and forth, as long as, in exchange, they provided some intelligence on some of the other cartels. Well, hey, if I'm a drug cartel, that's pretty sweet, right? I'll give the government intelligence on my rivals. They'll knock them out. I can ship in drugs and weapons, no problem. That's a good business arrangement if you can get it. When they get caught, bad things happen, right? Iran-Contra, they got caught shipping cocaine into the United States and using it to fund armed groups in foreign countries. Gary Webb, the journalist who figured out about this, he committed suicide with 2 bullets in his head. You almost wonder, do they do that just so that everybody with a brain realizes what happens, right? Just incredible. And then John Kerry, to his credit, he's wrong on almost everything, but he said, there's no question in my mind that people affiliated with or on the payroll of the CIA were involved in drug trafficking. There should be no question in anybody's mind. They've got caught so many times, there is no question that they've been running drugs. And that's in addition to all their black budgets, their secret budgets that are classified that even our members of Congress can't know about. They've overthrown at least 7 governments. It's probably a lot more than that. 7 governments is what foreign policy counted. They helped put the European Union into place, right? We have the declassified memos now. They were funding front groups and astroturf groups in Europe, the Federalist Youth, right? So that the Europeans could be conned into surrendering their national sovereignty, their right to self-government, and imposing this, super state USSR-like monster called the European Union, where they have a fake parliament that doesn't make laws, and just unbelievable stuff. That's a talk for another day. But their goal, and actually if you take a look at this here, this isn't even really very much of our writing. This is just stuff from the congressional record. You can read the bills that they were putting in, the statements they were making. Their goal was, we'll form an Atlantic Union first, and then from there we'll move on to a global government. So that was the agenda with that, and this was the CIA deeply involved in this. Not just the CIA, but the CIA was crucial. There you have the European Union, right? That is actually the European Union's parliament over there on the far right. In the middle, the one with the yellow stars around it, that is an actual poster produced by the European Union celebrating their parliament. And the other two drawings, that's the Tower of Babel, right? That's an artist's depiction of the Tower of Babel. The resemblance is not a coincidence. MK Ultra. So the CIA was actually involved in mind control experiments. And 10 years ago, if you had said that, they'd say, oh, that's so silly, that's so ludicrous, you're a conspiracy theorist, blah, blah, blah. Now we have the documents, at least some of them, right? A lot of them were destroyed deliberately to avoid complying with Congress and judicial requests and so on. But MK Ultra, you can read these documents yourself. They were using LSD, mind-altering drugs, all sorts of different things to see if they could control people's minds. They were doing experiments on unwilling subjects. They were going to mental institutions. They were even doing this on children. Some of it involved torture, sexual crimes. I mean, just stuff that's so monstrous, you don't even want to think about it. And we have some of the documents about it. MK Ultra is the name of the project. Operation Mockingbird. Again, we have a lot of the declassified documents. The CIA was recruiting journalists to serve as propagandists. They got hundreds of journalists to serve as their agents, right? A lot of them were at the biggest newspapers, magazines in the country. Couple of names here, right? Joseph Harsh of the Christian Science Monitor, Henry Luce, the founder of Time magazine, and on and on and on, right? Who could forget this guy, William F. Buckley? So he was actually working for the CIA for a number of years down in Mexico. He founded the National Review, right? Probably some of you guys remember the Never Trump stuff. And he was a big enemy of the John Birch Society. It's not surprising why. We'll talk more about him when we get to the Council on Foreign Relations and the Skull and Bones. He was a member of both. And so that's a little bit about the intelligence agencies, just a quick roundup. We'll look at their money men and their money operations. And so we'll look at what Georgetown University professor Carroll Quigley had to say, only because he was allowed to look at their records and he agreed with what these people were doing. He agreed with this agenda that these people were trying to foist on the American people and on all of humanity. And he wrote about it. His chief difference of opinion, he said, with them was that they wanted it to all be secret. He thought they should be known. His book, Tragedy and Hope, I actually have a copy of this at my house. I could not believe that he was writing these things, so I bought a copy of the book and looked it up. And, oh my goodness, there it is. He says, the powers of financial capitalism, he's talking about this network, had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. They've got it. They said the system was supposed to be controlled in a feudalist fashion by the central banks of the world, acting in concert, and that the apex of the system was going to be the Bank for International Settlements, a private bank owned and controlled by the world's central banks, and it continues, which were themselves private corporations. So Lufgren talks a little bit about this and how Wall Street plays such a key role in the operations of the deep state, at least the deep state that he recognizes, and he's right. I mean, Wall Street is critical to all this. Not everybody on Wall Street. There's plenty of good people on Wall Street, but certain institutions, Goldman Sachs comes to mind, are critical to this. Here we have Eric Holder, our Attorney General. He says that the bankers are too big to jail, right? If we were to prosecute them, it would be bad for the economy. So they can do basically anything they want, and they can't be prosecuted. Wouldn't that be nice if it was bad for the economy to prosecute us? There's a lot of families I could talk about, but there's one that I think it deserves at least a quick mention, and that's the Rothschild family. They're the one, we all think about Soros, right? Everybody knows George Soros, Dr. Evil they call him, right? He's got billions of dollars, he's just pumping billions of dollars into every kind of subversive activity, militant group, anti-American extremism that he can think of. Well, the Rothschilds are the ones who funded George Soros to get his start. So that gives you some perspective on how powerful these people are. And they brag on their website. You can go to their bank's website. They say, we've been at the center of the world's financial markets for more than 200 years. And they're not lying. They really have been. They say they can be closer to current issues than any other global financial institution, and they are not lying. Here's from an apologist for them, what's his name, Niall Ferguson, and he's a deep state guy all the way through and through, member of all these organizations, and he writes in his own book, the Rothschilds had decided the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars by putting their financial weight behind Britain. So this is a family that could decide the outcome of wars between the most powerful governments in the world 200 years ago. And they're even more powerful today. So that should give you a little bit of understanding of how powerful they are. They also come out of the woodwork from time to time. They don't like a lot of media attention, but this one up here in the top, that's Eric D. Rothschild. He came out, and I seized on it because he wrote a letter. He said that Irina Bokova, this Bulgarian communist, should run the United Nations. And she is an actual communist, member of the Bulgarian Communist Party from the time of her youth. Her father was a Politburo member. This Bulgarian Communist Party murdered hundreds of thousands of people. And the Rothschilds apparently thought that that would be a good person to have running the United Nations. It wouldn't be a lot different than the current guy there, but it is what it is. So there was an interesting study that came out in 2011 in a Swiss journal, the PLOS1. It's an open source journal, so anybody can go read this study. And what they found, it was the first one that really examined the control of all the corporations that run the economy. And what they found was incredibly interesting. They found that even though there's the appearance of all these different companies and decentralization, when you actually look, they are all controlled by this interlocking tiny network of organizations and individuals. So, they sit on each other's boards, they are all owned by the same banks and controlled by the same institutions. They said it forms like a bow tie structure, where at the middle you have what they called the economic super entity, the core that really dominates. So we think of all these big corporations and we think of them as separate entities, sometimes even competitors. Well, they're all controlled, not all, but almost all controlled by this tight network, and it's a fascinating thing. They try to represent this graphically. It's interesting stuff if you want to read the study and see how this actually works. And then you think, well, at least there's the other side of the world where there's communists. They can't be controlled by this deep state. I wish I could say that were true, but it's not. Here's an interesting book, and I think this is one of the books that woke me up. It was so important. When I read this, I realized, oh my goodness, this is crazy. Wall Street and the Bolshevik Revolution by a Stanford historian. He showed that people on Wall Street, some of these mega banking families, helped bring the communists to power and enslave Russia. And when I realized that, suddenly all these different things clicked into place. I said, oh my goodness, we are dealing with a monster here. And we are. So the Federal Reserve and the central banks, that's a talk for another day. There's a DVD in the back by G. Edward Griffin, does a marvelous job explaining how this works. But the central bank is owned by private banks, and they in fact brag about this in court, in press releases. They say, we are a private corporation, we have private shareholders, and the private shareholders elect our board. We don't have to obey Freedom of Information Act requests. And they basically act as the central planning board for the U.S. economy. By setting interest rates, they can control just about everything. They can cause a depression, they can cause anything they want. They can cause prosperity, or they can loot the entire economy. And they actually did this pretty recently during the crisis in 2007, 2008. They printed up 23.7 trillion. And you're thinking, that's a mistake. That can't possibly be. Well, that's what the Special Inspector General for the Troubled Asset Relief Program found, that the potential cost of these bailouts that the Federal Reserve was doing, this doesn't even take into account what Congress was doing, could have been 23.7 trillion. Now, presumably a lot of that got paid back, but we're talking, for perspective, the U.S. economy is about 17 trillion, the GDP. So these people printed up more money than our entire national economy, and they hand it out to their friends, literally the banks that they own, and it's just an incredible process. Study came out, the central banks and the governments now own $30 trillion worth of stocks. So it's actually pretty new for the Federal Reserve to be involved in the stock market. That happened after the 2008 crisis. They didn't used to do that. Now they just buy stocks, right? They want a stock to go up, they just print up some fresh money, put it into the stock market. And they manipulate prices on just about everything. So there's the value of the dollar. All of that wealth essentially was sucked out of the American people and transferred over to the deep state behind the deep state. A lot of it got sucked into these foundations, which are a crucial component of the deep state and how it operates. So in 2014, the Senate came out with a really interesting report, the Senate Environment Committee and Public Works Committee, and they identified this thing they called a billionaires club that was using nonprofit foundations, tax-exempt foundations, to literally create the green movement, the global warming, the environmentalist movement. It's a really interesting report. I encourage you to read it, but it just gives you some understanding of how these people do. They take all this money out of the economy, then they put it in tax-exempt foundations so that it can't be taxed, and then they use it to fundamentally transform our country, as Barack Obama might have put it. Some examples: we have the Gates Foundation that created the Common Core. We have the Soros Foundation, funds that Occupy Wall Street, the Black Lives Matter, the Catholics for Choice. Of course, he's not a Catholic. He loves to fund Catholic groups, but he describes himself as a god, and he brags that he's an atheist. So interesting that he funds all these Christian organizations, isn't it? In 1952, Congress decided to investigate these foundations. Incredible investigation. G. Edward Griffin did an interview with the lead investigator, the lead staffer on this committee. It's well worth your while. It's on YouTube. It's an hour long. And to just condense what he said into a very, very brief statement, he said that the head of the Ford Foundation admitted to him that their goal was to so alter life in the United States that we could be comfortably merged with the Soviet Union. So that's where they're going with this, right? And the report itself that came out, they tried to get rid of it, but there are still some copies floating around. It is unbelievable. They say that these foundations were funding subversive activities, internationalism, moral relativism. They've directly funded subversion. Education, of course, has been a key component to this. All these foundations have been corrupting education. If you only buy one thing tonight, if you have kids, grandkids, I would say that this is worth your while, this and this. But the reason is because the education has been their key weapon. And in fact, this is what the Reese Committee found out. They said this revolution could never have happened had they not hijacked the educational system. So, if you do nothing else for the cause of freedom, for the cause of America, protect your own kids, right? If you don't have time to get involved, at the very least, protect your kids, protect your grandkids from being dumbed down, from being brainwashed and indoctrinated, from being made illiterate. I mean, that's the very least we can do, right? What higher priority could we have than our own kids? So to understand the mechanics of it, I really encourage you to learn more about that. And so now let's look at the deep state behind the deep state. And I'm running up on time, but a bunch of dead people, right? So there is a deep state behind the deep state, right? It's not just the bureaucracies. It's not just the intelligence agencies. There is a deep state behind the deep state. So we're going to go through a couple of these. There's a lot more that we could have talked about, but I chose the ones that I thought were most important, most relevant to focus in on. We've got the CFR, the Council on Foreign Relations, Bilderberg, Trilateral Commission, and then we've got two secret societies we'll look at. And there's obviously a lot more, but I think two are especially noteworthy, the Bohemian Grove and the Skull and Bones Society. We have, and I know this quote is so overused, but I think it's just so important to establish the truth of what I'm going to be saying for the rest of this. This is in his own book. I mean, you can go to don't buy his book. These people already have more money than you could ever possibly fathom. But go to the library, just pick it up and read it yourself. It's on page 405. It's in his memoirs. It says, some even believe that we, the Rockefeller family, are part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the United States, characterizing my family and me as internationalists and conspiring. So he's the one using the word conspiracy, not me. Conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. One world, if you will. And then he says, if that's the charge, I stand guilty and I am proud of it. So he's proud to be a conspirator working against the best interests of his country with a secret cabal to form one world. So, I mean, we could stop right here. So there you go, right? But let's take a look at these others that he's conspiring with, and let's see, what they're up to. There it is from his actual book, right? It's underlined there, page 405. And back to Quigley from Tragedy and Hope. He says this idea that there should be two political parties with different ideas, right? One of the right and one of the left. That's silly. That's acceptable only to doctrinaire academic thinkers. Instead, the two parties should be almost identical so that we can throw them out at any time and we're not going to get any profound shifts in policy. Does that sound familiar? How many times have we gone through, the Republicans are bad, we'll elect some Democrats. Oh, the same stuff. Oh, the Democrats are bad, let's go and elect some Republicans. And nothing changes, right? At least nothing of substance. We have some new rhetoric, but the policies continue. And that's why. And then he says, this guy, Carroll Quigley, says there does exist, and there has existed for a generation, it's probably even longer, an Anglophile network which operates to some extent in the way that the radical right believes the Communists act. This network we may identify as the Round Table groups, and it has no aversion to cooperating with communists, and frequently does so. Isn't that interesting? So straight from the horse's mouth again. So two of the key groups, he actually identifies two of these key groups, the Council on Foreign Relations in this network, and its sister organization in Britain, the Royal Institute of International Affairs. It's called the Chatham House sometimes. Their logo means everywhere, right? I don't know if you guys saw a little horse carrying the banner. Pretty creepy. Founded in 1921 by the deep state behind the deep state, the mega bankers, and we won't go into a lot of the history, but here's Hillary Clinton. I won't play the video just because I have the quote right here, but she said, "We get a lot of advice from the council," and she was talking to them in Washington, D.C. So that will mean I won't have to go as far to be told what we should be doing and how we should think about the future. So we know the Democrats put a lot of stock in what this organization says, right? And I want to show you guys real quick a video of Republicans saying the same general thing. And they think it's funny.
It's good to be back at the Council on Foreign Relations. As Pete mentioned, I've been a member for a long time and was actually a director for some period of time. I never mentioned that when I was campaigning for re-election back home in Wyoming.
They think that's so funny. We're so stupid. Ha ha ha. That's really funny. But so you have the Hillary Clintons and the Dick Cheneys laughing about how stupid we are because they go to the same little clubs and they have the same little friends and they pursue the same little policies. They just use slightly different rhetoric on the campaign trail and they don't tell us about it and then they laugh in front of their friends, right? Isn't that cute? But so that, it just gives you an idea. So we're talking, it's totally bipartisan. There is no Republican and Democrat when you get to the deep state behind the deep state. So they have a little letter next to their name. But, these are some of the people, right? They have thousands of members. But here's some of them, right? Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, Timothy Geithner, Paul Volcker, right? All these different people, H.R. McMaster. And the list goes on, right? All the leaders on both sides of the aisle are all in this little club. And you're not, right? So some idea of how influential they are. They had 284 in Carter's administration, 313 in Reagan's, and on down the list. We'll have to see how many go into Trump's. It seems to be a lot less than the others, but we're still early on in the session and a lot can change, right? A lot of threats can be made, a lot of blackmail, right? We showed earlier they were spying on Congress. Who knows who else they're spying on, right? And if they're spying on Congress, they could blackmail people, right? They could blackmail Supreme Court justices. They could even blackmail the president, right? So we'll have to see how many CFR members end up in there. The members of the CFR really represent the cream of the crop when it comes to the people who run the world, or at least the United States. You've got all the top media people, the fake journalists, the fake media executives. You've got the big oil executives, big pharma executives. You've got the leaders of the top universities. You've got the big columnists. You've got lots and lots and lots of members of Congress, both currently sitting and retired. You've got all the bosses of the intelligence community, right? The guys who like to brag about how they kill people based on metadata, all members of this stuff. All the important bureaucrats, the military brass, the people who run the central banks, the people who run the foundations, they all are members of this little club, and we are not. If you want to find out if someone's a member, they make it very convenient. You can go to their website. It's cfr.org/membership, and you can find out if you're a member of Congress or your favorite bureaucrat or your political party leader is a member. And I encourage people to do that. And actually in the back of this book, there is a list. I'm not sure if it's totally up to date, but you can find a big list of people who are members. There's also corporate members of the CFR. They have, Goldman Sachs, all the mega banks, J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, Citi, Deutsche Bank, all the big oil, right? All the military-industrial complex. These people that take tax money and allegedly keep us safe, and some certainly do in some ways, but a lot of them are just profiteers. We've got all the big media too, right? News Corporation, the owners of Fox News, Wall Street Journal, New York Post, all these ones that are supposed to be conservative, are also part of the club. And you wonder why we don't hear about the club on Fox News or in the Wall Street Journal. Well, there's why, right? It's not hard to figure out. And people have actually come out of this organization and have tried to blow the whistle on this. Admiral Chester Ward, who was a very important guy in the Navy, served as the judge advocate of the Navy. He came out, he wrote a book with Phyllis Schlafly, where he said that their goal is global government. He said not every single person in the organization believes that, but most of the members do. He said there's no term of revulsion carrying a meaning so deep as America First, right? And we wondered why they hated America First so much. He also said, Chester Ward, in that book, Kissinger on the Couch, he said that within the CFR, there is a much smaller group, but more powerful, made up of Wall Street international bankers and their key agents. And so basically what they want, he says, is to be in control of a global government through the banking system. And he said this is headed by the Rockefeller brothers. And they'll actually tell you their agenda in their magazine, Foreign Affairs. If you read it, as Admiral Chester Ward said, you can figure out what the policy of the United States is going to be years in advance, because they'll start pushing it in there, then the resources, the membership of the CFR will go out and promote it, and anybody who opposes it will be a kook, a homophobe, a racist, pick your nasty term, and that's what they'll call you. And that's how it works. And so they told us in 1974, the former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State, in short, the House of World Order will have to be built from the bottom up rather than from the top down. An end run around national sovereignty, eroding it piece by piece, will accomplish much more than the old-fashioned assault. So they recently said that deep state, that doesn't apply to the United States. Here it's all transparent. Sure, if you believe that, I've got some beachfront property in Nebraska. You can see me later. So if you want to learn more about the CFR, and I encourage you to do so, great book, Shadows of Power. And then there's also a reprint of an article that James Perloff wrote in the New American about the CFR. Very highly recommended, because you can't understand American policy, especially American foreign policy, without understanding the CFR. So the Trilateral Commission is a similar group. It's more elite and more international, founded by Rockefeller, the guy who bragged about being a conspirator. And he founded it in 1973 with this guy, the late Zbigniew Brzezinski. He just died. He and Rockefeller both, by some weird coincidence. I think they died this year, very recently. And he wrote a book in the early 70s, Between Two Ages, America's Role in the Technotronic Age. And in the book, he says America is obsolete, and he praises Marxism. And I can show you the quotes, right? He says Marxism is a vital and creative stage in the maturing of man's universal vision. Isn't that cute, right? All these wonderful praises for Marxism. No mention of the 100 to 200 million people who have been murdered by Marxists and Leninist regimes. The key goal of the Trilateral Commission was always what they called this new international economic order. And Patrick Wood, who's a friend of mine, really good researcher, he wrote this book with Anthony Sutton, Trilaterals over Washington, and he figured out much later that what they were really going after was not even Marxism. It's what he calls technocracy. And if you want to see what a technocracy looks like, communist China is moving very quickly in that direction. So not a good thing. Centralized control of the economy. He also admits in the book that the real goal is a global government, but it's not going to be achieved by just starting off with a global government, right? So we got to start with these regional governments. We've got to unite the communist and non-communist world, and then we'll have a global government. And he repeated this in 1995 at a summit organized by Mikhail Gorbachev, the former dictator of the Soviet Union. And he said, we do not have a new world order, and we can't leap into a world government in one quick step. We need, for genuine globalization, is progressive regionalization. And so that's what we see with the European Union. Who knows there's an African Union? There's a Union of South American states. Putin is building a Eurasian Union, openly. It's not even a secret. So you have all these unions popping up all over the world, and it's all by design, right? They're going to move toward larger, more stable, more cooperative units until you finally get the New World Order, is what they call it. He bragged before he died that all the key foreign policy decision makers in the Carter administration were members of the Trilateral Commission. And Obama called Zbigniew Brzezinski one of our most outstanding thinkers. So if you think America's obsolete and you want regional governments on the road to world government and you think Marxism is fine and dandy, then Obama will call you one of the greatest thinkers of our time. right? Barry Goldwater warned about this group and that they were trying to set up a criminal global government. And here's a number of the other groups that I want to talk about that are not secret. You know, I wish we had more time to go through each of these. We don't. Le Cercle is a little bit secret. It's a French-European organization that's pretty secret. But a lot of these are pretty open. You know, they have websites. You can visit the website. You can see their policy papers. But these are all groups that are involved in this push toward world government. So we'll talk about Bilderberg for a minute. This is a really interesting graphic. It was I found it at Business Insider, which is online publication. And in the middle there, you have Bilderberg, and all around the inner circle, you have members of the Bilderberg, and then from there, it's lines to the corporations that they control, the newspapers they control, the government they control. And what you see is that when taken all together, the Bilderbergers run pretty much everything. Not everyone who goes to Bilderberg is, a secret conspirator working for a new world order. Occasionally they invite, just people they think might be useful idiots who've come into some level of power. They want to test them out. Are you our type of person, right? Do you deserve a promotion, maybe to the presidency or to being, the prime minister? So they interview people at these meetings, and but it's an incredibly influential group. I've been to some of them, not invited, obviously. Right? But I've been to some of them to see what they were up to. And again, it's like the CFR, all the elites of society, right? All the big journalists, all the owners of the newspapers, the presidents, prime ministers, kings, generals, heads of international organizations, they all meet up together behind closed doors. Of course, you pay for their security, right? They'll have an army outside waiting to make sure none of the serfs get through, and you can pay for that, but you don't get to know what's going on. So some of the people who went to Bilderberg before coming into prominence: Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Mario Monti, who out of nowhere was suddenly installed as the Prime Minister of Italy. So it's just a small sampling. These guys go there, they're unknown. Nobody knew Bill Clinton outside of Arkansas. Went to Bilderberg, and then suddenly, oh hey, what a great guy! You'd be a good president, wouldn't you? So now we'll put you on our fake media, we'll promote you, we'll say you're a great guy, and won't that be nice? So there's some of the Bilderbergers, right? Sometimes they don't even put all the people on the list. One of the ones that I went to, they had released some kind of list. They started releasing lists of who goes. They didn't have Bill Gates on there, and then we found Bill Gates sneaking in the back door. Incredible. But so, you probably recognize some of those people. There's the head of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke. There's Bill Gates, Bill Clinton, and on, right? There they are again, the head of the IMF, and the head of, the heads of the European Union. Here's some more of the attendees. Very, very powerful people. And now, as I said, they've even got a website now. This is a pretty recent phenomenon. They started putting it out a couple of years ago when they were accused of being overly secretive. They said, well, now we have a website. Now we put out press releases, and now we release the names of the people who attend. Of course, you don't get to find out what they talked about. And they tell you, oh, we don't discuss policy. We don't set any policy there. We're all there in private capacities. We're just having a nice discussion. But then they'll come out afterwards, and then they'll laugh in your face and tell you that actually they really are setting policy. Here's Will Hutton, hates American conservatives, by the way, used to be a newspaper editor. Said, Bilderberg is one of the key meetings of the year. The consensus establishes the backdrop against which policy is made worldwide. They even invite Chinese communists nowadays. Seriously. Here's the former head of NATO. The participants are obviously considered to use this report that they prepare for the Bilderberg members when setting policy in their environments which they affect. This guy, I actually got to meet him. I went to one of the Bilderberg summits in Copenhagen a couple of years ago in Denmark. And this guy, he was one of the useful idiots that I talk about, right? He's not a secret conspirator. He came out and he's like, hey guys, I'm in the meeting. He just, I think, wanted to show how cool he was that he got to go to Bilderberg. And so they talked to him. They said, are you there in a private capacity, as Bilderberg says? He said, oh no, I'm here in a public capacity. I'm a politician. Of course I'm here. I can't stop being a politician. And I heard him say it. He said it, he was standing like here to me. So incredible. But then on the website, the Bilderberg says participants take part as individuals in their own right. Well, that's not what he told us. Here, this guy admitted that one of their goals was world government. And it's for our benefit, right? We're just too stupid to understand. But he says, oh, it's just people kill each other, and so if we just have a nice world government, then we think that'll stop. And that's what they want us to believe. He was the chairman of Bilderberg for a while, and he went around bragging about how the Bilderberg helped create the euro, right, the single currency. And he told the BBC, that automatically when you go to Bilderberg, you have internationalists, which is just another word for globalists. So Skull and Bones is one of the big secret societies. I want to show you guys a quick video. Let me see if I got it.
You were both in Skull and Bones, the secret society.
It's so secret we can't talk about it.
What does that mean for America? The conspiracy theorists are going to go
I'm
on.
sure they are. I don't know. I haven't seen the web.
Number
page.
322?
First of all, he's not the nominee. And, look, I look
Are
forward...
you prepared to lose?
No, I'm not going to lose.
You both were members of Skull and Bones, a secret society at Yale. What does that tell us?
Not much, because it's a secret.
Is there a secret handshake? Is there a secret code?
I wish there were something secret I could manifest.
322?
Oh, there you go. They think it's so funny, right? They're all part of the same clubs, and we're not in them. And again, there's so many examples of this kind of stuff. I just try to pick a few for you guys. So there's a picture of the Skull and Bones. You can see their nice logo there, right? A skull and crossbones. I mean, isn't that a society you would want to join? Don't you want your president to be a member of a society with a logo like that? Founded in 1832 by an actual drug dealer, right? His business was shipping opium and getting the Chinese addicted. And a lot of people have speculated that they're connected to the Illuminati. We'll talk about the Illuminati for a minute if we have time. But they do a lot of occult rituals. Some people have filmed some of the stuff that, from outside. You hear these weird screams. They get them in a coffin doing, I won't even talk about it because it's too gross. If you want to know about it, you can look it up. Some of the members are listed here. The cream of the crop again. William Buckley, you see him there again. Lots of presidents, Supreme Court justices, heads of CIA, et cetera, et cetera. And Anthony Sutton, who I've mentioned a few times here, he wrote a book about them. He wasn't a conspiracy theorist until he found out about Skull and Bones. Charlotte Iserbitch, who's actually a friend of mine, wonderful lady, I think it was her father or her grandfather had been involved, so she gave the list to him of all the members. And he said, oh my goodness, this is America's secret establishment. He said that they use the dialectical process, so they control the right and the left, they argue, and then what they want is the synthesis. So it's very clever how they manipulate us. Here's another, I won't show you guys the video, but Alex Jones, think what you like about him. I love Alex Jones. He snuck into this little secret club and he filmed them doing one of their little rituals. So here's a still shot of their ritual. They're actually standing in front of an actual 40-foot stone owl doing this ceremony that they call the cremation of care. And if you listen to the video, you hear this horrifying, blood-curdling scream. And they said, oh, that wasn't a real human, that was a human effigy. But regardless of what it was, these are the most powerful men in the world. They get together in the woods of California, they run around naked, actually, they pee in the woods, they do all kinds of weird stuff, and then they get together in front of this big stone owl and they have a ceremony they call the cremation of care ceremony. It's the most bizarre thing in the world. And here, these are our leaders. These are our presidents, these are our senators, these are our Supreme Court justices. They're acting like very weird, right? It's so strange. If you want to watch the video, I encourage you to do it. It's on YouTube. Alex Jones snuck in there, and then he actually interviewed one of the guys, David Gergen, who's kind of like the Karl Rove for a bunch of different presidents. He said, hey, I saw you at Skull and Bones. You guys were running around naked in the woods. He's like, you're not supposed to talk about that. Didn't you take an oath not to say anything? He's like, oh, no, I snuck in. He's, oh, well, I don't respect you for that. Really funny. So that's real journalism, right? Finding out the things that we're not supposed to find out. That's what journalists ought to be doing. And this ritual has been going on for a long time. This picture was taken in 1907. Same thing, right? Standing in front of their big stone owl. A lot of people have called it Molech. If you've read your Bible, you probably remember Molech, right? They would do the weird child sacrifices in Canaan to Molech. Weird stuff. There's a picture during the day of Molech, or their giant stone owl. There, you can see some of the people who attend. There's Richard Nixon and Ronald Reagan at a meeting of the Bohemian Grove. And a bunch of other people, the treasurer for the DNC, big businessmen. Very interesting. So Richard Nixon said in his memoirs, he talked a little bit about Bohemian Grove, said the most important speech he gave was the one he gave at the Bohemian Grove. Even though it wasn't publicized in the press, it helped him reach some of the most important and influential men. Here's some more Bohemian Grove attendees. You've got the head of the CIA, McCone. You've got the owner of the Bechtel Corporation. You've got secretaries of state, the secretary of the Treasury, secretary of labor. You've got U.S. presidents, right? There's Gerald Ford. Isn't that interesting that these guys go and stand in front of a 40-foot stone owl and do weird stuff? They really don't like Trump, which I thought was fascinating. There's a good endorsement if I ever saw one. So some of the emails got hacked from this guy, Colin Powell. Maybe you guys remember him. And he had written to the former Minister of Justice in Canada. He got to sit next to the Prime Minister of Canada at the Bohemian Grove. He said, Grove attendees know that Trump is a disaster. So they think he's a disaster. So that probably means he's not a disaster, right? At least that's how I see it. So the Order of the Illuminati, we'll run through it because we're almost out of time. If you want to learn about the Illuminati, here's the book. I read this probably 8 months ago, and it just changed my way of thinking about so many things. Because you hear about the Illuminati and you hear, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Well, it's not. It's a real organization. George Washington had this book in his library when he died. You can read his letters where he talks about the Illuminati on the government's own web pages. So this secret society was founded by this guy, Adam Weishaupt, professor of law at Ingolstadt University. And what he was doing was attracting the most influential men he could find, and he attracted a lot of them, and then infiltrating Masonic lodges to try to hijack Freemasonry to advance his agenda. They got caught. The Elector of Bavaria, where this society was founded, banned the organization and tried his best to suppress it, and supposedly they disappeared. This was actually written by a Mason, John Robison. He was the first head of the Royal Society of Edinburgh, a professor, a very respected man. And he was a Mason, so that's how he found out that these guys were infiltrating all the Masonic lodges and trying to hijack them to promote these subversive principles. Their goal was essentially to break down and destroy all the governments and all the religions of Europe to build this kind of global, what we would call today, communist government with no families, no property rights, absolutely satanic if you believe the Bible. And so George Washington knew about this. His friend, a reverend, wrote to him. He said, hey, you know the Illuminati? They're trying to infiltrate Masonic lodges. Do you think they're here in America? And he wrote back, he said, it's not my intention to doubt that the doctrine of the Illuminati and the principles of Jacobinism had not spread in the United States. On the contrary, no one is more satisfied of this fact than I am. This is, you can read this on the government's own website. This is from George Washington's letter, and he warned about the Illuminati's diabolical tenets. So the agenda for the deep state, that's really what I talked about in War on America. It's a global totalitarian government. I was going to show you guys just a real quick 4-minute video with a whole bunch of these people. Bill Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Henry Kissinger, who's involved in Bilderberg, Trilaterals, Bohemian Grove, all those little things we were talking about. They talk about a new world order that they want to build. And some of you probably still remember in 1991, Bush was talking about it in public. He said it would be a new world order where a credible United Nations would use its peacekeeping abilities to bring about the vision of the UN's founders. Now, if anybody knows about the vision of the UN's founders, we could talk about our lead guy there, Alger Hiss. He was convicted for being a Soviet spy and he went to jail. And then, of course, Stalin sent his minions, and a lot of them went to the Bohemian Grove. And so that's the vision of the UN's founders. And so that's the vision of the deep state behind the deep state. They've told us that very, very clearly, and they're using all sorts of different methods. Now let's talk about Trump and the deep state. Trump really campaigned on a platform of draining the swamp. We're going to get rid of what we're talking about as the deep state or the swamp or the insiders. He said we're going to stop the globalists, we're going to promote Americanism, we're going to put all the corrupt, crooked people in jail. And unfortunately, some of them are now in his administration. Now, I don't know that all these people are bad. I'm just listing a couple of facts here. Justice Gorsuch, who Trump appointed to the Supreme Court. And from everything I've heard, he sounds like a pretty decent guy, believes pretty decent things about the Constitution, but he was a term member of the Council on Foreign Relations. He no longer is, but he was. They have two different types of membership. One is a term membership, which lasts for 5 years. One is a life membership. He was a term member. He no longer is a member, but he was. H.R. McMaster. And again, not everyone in the CFR is a New World Order advocate who wants to sell out the United States. So I add that as a caveat. H.R. McMaster, Trump's national security advisor who replaced Flynn. He went to Bilderberg, member of the CFR. He's still listed on the CFR's website. Robert Litziger, who's doing the U.S. trade deals, also a member of the CFR. Elaine Chao, big promoter of Red China, Communist China, married to Mitch McConnell. Secretary of Transportation, she's a member of CFR. Dina Habib Powell, she's in all of them, right? She's CFR, Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg, you name it, she's there. Rick Perry, Secretary of Energy, was an attendee at Bilderberg. From listening to him talk, you don't really get the impression that he's one of these guys, but you never know. He wanted to abolish the Department of Energy, and somehow he ended up in charge of it. Steve Mnuchin, the Treasury Secretary, he is a member of Skull and Bones, big Goldman Sachs guy. James Mattis, our Defense Secretary, was a Bilderberg attendee. Wilbur Ross was actually employed by the Rothschilds for 24 years, directly, right? No middlemen, so interesting. There's Henry Kissinger, right? I mean, he was David Rockefeller's right-hand man. Now David Rockefeller has gone to meet his maker. You know, who knows what became of him? But Henry Kissinger's still running around, still promoting his New World Order. And there he is, just a couple days ago, in Trump's White House. So what do we do about this? And this is the end of the presentation. First of all, we need to educate ourselves, right? Ed talked about we need to educate ourselves. We need to know what's going on. We need to read. We need to read our Bible, our Constitution, our Declaration of Independence. We need to read real news, right? For that, you can subscribe to the New American Magazine, among others, right? We need to educate our children. You know, and that's a really easy thing to do, and it's something that everybody should have a motivation to do, right? If you don't educate your own kids, they're going to be brainwashed, they're going to be indoctrinated, we're going to lose our country, and so it's critical that we understand on this. We need to educate others, right? We need to get involved, we need to educate our communities, our neighbors, our friends, our families, and we need to not be misled, right? There's plenty of people who will come along and say, oh, it's the Jews, oh, it's the Catholics, oh, it's the Freemasons, or, you know, they'll tell us, oh, there's just a really simple solution. If we just have a constitutional convention, we'll just change the Constitution and then everything's going to magically be fine again, right? And there's people who say that, right? If we just add term limits with a con, suddenly we'll all be okay. Unfortunately, nothing could be further from the truth, right? The electorate is not going to educate itself just because we've adopted term limits or a balanced budget amendment or anything else. So the Constitution is really a key solution, right? So much of what they do depends on unconstitutional government. If we could get the federal government to obey the Constitution, many of their most important tools would evaporate, would disappear, and, you know, they'd be back to square one. So that would be a really good thing. If we could educate the electorate to be understanding the Constitution and holding the feet to the fire of the politicians, we would be in good shape. We can nullify unconstitutional federal laws. And you'll hear the con promoters say, oh, we can't do that. You know, that's illegal, right? The Supreme Court's going to rule against it. Well, the liberals are doing it, right? You go ask somebody in Colorado who's going into a marijuana store right now about nullification. They'll say, oh, yeah, it works great. Yeah, there's federal laws that say, you know, marijuana needs to be banned. But in Colorado, they're smoking pot legally. So, you know, think what you want about smoking pot, but the liberals are using nullification. And then on our side, we have people say, oh, no, we can't do that. You know, federal supremacy clause, or it's not going to work. That's absolutely silly. Of course we can nullify unconstitutional laws. That's what Jefferson and that's what Madison said was the rightful remedy to unconstitutional laws. We need to get us out of the United Nations, obviously. Taking back Congress is going to be absolutely critical. And it's not that hard. We don't even need to take back both chambers. If we can get 218 good guys in the House, all spending bills have to originate in the House. All taxes have to originate in the House. So if we could get 218 good guys there, we could shut it all down, right? No more money for unconstitutional bureaucracies. No more money for unconstitutional programs. It would be incredible. And it's, you know, it's not that hard. Use the Freedom Index. I think I have a copy here, right? If your congressman is not obeying the Constitution, and you can prove it right here, you know, here's his voting record, is not obeying the Constitution, then you need a new congressman. And when you distribute enough of these, you know, and I have personal experience with this. We did this when I first joined the chapter. We educated our community. We went to the town hall meetings of our congressmen. We said, hey, here's one for you, here's one for you. And the congressman would come in, everybody's sitting there reading about his voting record. And you only need to influence, you know, a few hundred people for the primary to get out a bad congressman. And then you can put in a good guy, which is what we did. Call Congress. You should have their phone number on your speed dial. If they're talking about some abominable law that's going to infringe on the Constitution, you should call them and tell them no. They're supposed to be representing you, but they can't represent you if they don't know what you want. The John Birch Society, Ed talked about it a little bit at the beginning. You know, the goal here is to bring about less government, more responsibility, and with God's help, and that's crucial, with God's help, a better world. So the JBS has been around for, you know, almost 6 decades now, providing educational materials, right? All kinds of stuff here. This book, Proofs of a Conspiracy, that I mentioned. The JBS got this back in print, right? The New American Magazine, an incredible tool that you can use. The Freedom Index. I mean, there's just so much that we can use to take back our country if we have the people to use it. So join, get involved with the local chapter. You guys have Ed and Diane here. You could not have more awesome leaders in your community than Ed and Diane. So, you know, I'm actually a little bit jealous. It's amazing. You guys are so lucky. And then we have, you know, Robert Welch, and he said something really important. There is a conspiracy at work, and now David Rockefeller has admitted it and that he's proud of it, but there is a conspiracy at work as sure as there's a law of gravity. And to try to overcome its effects by ignoring its existence is exactly the kind of opposition that the conspiracy has contrived for itself, right? If we ignore them, they're not going to go away, right? It's like the ostrich who sticks his head in the sand. You're not going to get eaten because you put your head in the sand. I mean, you're not going to get eaten because you hide your face, right? The same thing is going to happen. So we need to expose these people. And then we need to realize, too, that this is actually a spiritual battle as well. The Bible tells us that. If you read your Bible, go to Ephesians 6:12. We wrestle not against the flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So if you're not involved in your church, if you're not reading your Bible, if you're not praying for our country and for our children, you need to be, right? And it's that simple. This is a spiritual battle as well. These people are not out there worshiping a 40-foot stone owl because they think it's funny. Some of them maybe. But there's a lot more to this than we're seeing on the surface. And so we absolutely must be involved in this aspect as well. So if you're not going to church, I really encourage you, get involved in a church. And then some parting words. I know it's kind of a downer, right? I'm the opposite of a motivational speaker. I come here and get everybody all depressed. But there is good news, right? So the kings of the earth, this is from Psalm 2, verse 2. The kings of the earth take their stand, and the rulers conspire together against the Lord and His anointed one. So the kings of the earth, they think they're going to conspire against the Lord and His anointed. Well, we can see 2 verses later how God reacts. The one enthroned in heaven laughs. He ridicules them. So, when we realize that God laughs at these people, suddenly they're not so scary anymore, right? We need to be exposing them. I mean, we have a duty as citizens, we have a duty as Christians, we have a duty as God-fearing people, we have a duty to our children to do it, but we shouldn't be scared, we shouldn't be intimidated. I mean, God laughs at these people. If God can laugh at them, we don't have to be scared either. So visit the evidence table in the back, collect, get some more information, and stay involved, stay active. Thank you guys so much for having me, and God bless you.